Okay, good morning once again. So today we're going into balance of payments, chapter 24. So we're talking about balance of payment. I know it's the record of all international financial transactions made by the residents of a country. So there are transactions that are done with people that stays in the country against the rest of the world. So the record is called the balance of payments. So there are three main categories of balance of payment. We have the current account, which talks about goods and services exported or imported, the capital account, and the financial account. Then we go into interconnectedness of the economies. So before we talk about balance of payment, we said balance of payment means a record of transactions of countries or people living in the country against the rest of the world. So there won't be this thing happening without interconnectedness of the economies. That means there's globalization. There's movement of people, there's movement of capital, there's movement of technology cut across the world. Without this thing happening, we won't be talking about balance of payment or balance of trade. So globalization makes the world becomes one and smaller. That is the point I'm making here. So we won't talk about this all without interconnectedness of the economies. And when we talk about interconnectedness of the economy, we're talking about globalization. So here this applies to globalization, and there are four key ways in which the process has taken place. For the interconnectedness of the economy, it has happened because there's globalization. And what brings about globalization? Number one, the proportion of output of each nation is growing. So each country are producing more than what they used to produce. As a result, they have more to sell. Get the point here? The proportion of output, that means your GDP continues to rise. As a result, you have more to give out of the economy, out of your country. If it was just within your economy, that means you are not increasing your output. But now that the output is increasing with different factors like technological advancement, like movement of people, like technical know-how. So output of your country is increasing. As the output is increasing, you have the opportunity to sell to the outside world. You have to export. So that brings about interconnectedness, globalization. So the first reason for globalization is that output in each nation is increasing. Do we get the point? Mm-hmm. The second one, there is a high level of increase in the ownership of both physical and financial assets in one country by economic actors in another country. Now it becomes easier for me to be a Nigerian, have investment in Libya, for you as a Libyan to have investments in Turkey, to have investment in America, wherever it becomes easier now. As a result of that, globalization is taking place. Do you get the second point here? Now we can own assets. I can have an asset here. You could have an asset in Spain, wherever in the country. Because we can have access to these things, it means there's globalization. Do we get the second point here? The first one is about increasing each nation's output. The second one is about the ability that we have now to have access to own assets in any country that we chooses to have it. The third point, there's continuous immigration. So people move from one country to another, the movement of people. Do we get it? So I am here right now. If there was no globalization, I might not be here. I'm a Nigerian, maybe I will stay in Nigeria. But I'm able to come to Libya because there's globalization. There's movement of people, there's immigration. Do we get it? The last point, there's increasing rates of technological advancement and share of knowledge. These days, each country come up with different ideas about making sure the life becomes better, making sure that quality improves, technological advancement. So there's different share of technological know-how. As a result, globalization is taking place. So, China is good at that. America is good at that. So they are able to share knowledge. Belgium is good at that. So they are able to share knowledge in terms of technological advancement, and this brings about globalization. So nobody can do it all alone. We need each other to get things done. So all these brings about interconnectedness of the economies. Is it clear? Yes. Great. So we go on to the balance of payments. So for the balance of payment itself, I said it has three aspects. We have the current account, the capital account, and the financial account. But today we want to focus on the current account. Why do we call it the current account? Because it records the purchase and sales of goods. It records the purchase and sales of goods. What I mean by sales and purchases, export and import. So we could buy and we could sell. So what are the components of current account? One, trading goods. Why do we call it trade in goods? These are physical, visible, what we can see, like marker, like cars, like computers. These things we can see them, so they are physical. So we call them visible, what we can see. So trade in goods, this applies to the visible goods that are exported or imported. So they are either exported or imported. So these two will happen. So if it is exported, we call it visible exports. If it is exported, we call it what? Visible export. So what is visible export? These are goods sold to foreigners. This increasing flow. Goods that we sell to foreigners, we call it visible export. That means we are taking it out of this country. And if this continues to increase, it means our inflow will continue to increase within the economy. That improves our current accounts. Because we are able to sell more outside of the country. It means money is coming into our country. Visible exports. Do we get visible export here? Goods sold to foreign customers. Then we have visible imports. These are goods bought by domestic residents from foreigners. We as Libyans, things we buy from foreign customers or from foreign businesses, we call it visible imports. Do we get imports? Do we get imports, please?
Yes.
Good. Then we have the balance of trade itself. This is the difference between the visible exports and visible imports. So, when we do exports, we do imports. The difference between import and export gives us our balance of trade. Get the point here? The difference between our export and our import brings about balance of trade. Do we get it here? Please, leave him, let him just sit down. Do you get what we're saying there, please? Please focus here. There's export, there's import. There's visible export, there's visible import. So the difference between visible export and visible import is called the balance of trade, BOT. The difference between what we are selling out and what we are getting in, what we are buying in, gives us our balance of trade. Do we understand balance of trade here?
Yes.
So they might ask you in the exams, what is the balance of trade? It is the difference between the visible export and the visible import. I think it's clear. Then we go to trade in services. Note, we don't only sell goods, we also render services. So we could render services to other countries, and we could get services or receive services from other countries. So when this happens, we call it trade in services. Do we get trade in services here? This is for physical goods like you can see, like the cars, laptops, whatever we can see that is physical, we can touch them. But for services, they are invisible. So we could call it invisible service or invisible goods. So here I wrote, trade in services. These are a variety of services traded internationally, including financial services like banking, insurance, transportation, shipping and the rest, and tourism. These are all services. They are rendered. We cannot see them physically. We can only feel them. So we have two types of trade in service. We have invisible exports, which are services recorded to foreigners. Services we give or we render to foreigners, we call it invisible exports. Example like Chinese people coming down to Libya for tourism. That is going to count as our own export. Do we get it? We going to China for tourism, it's going to count as their own export. It becomes import for us. Do we get the difference here? So whoever comes here, whoever we render services to here that are foreigners, we call it invisible exports. And if we are getting services from other countries or other foreigners, we call it invisible imports. Do we get the difference here? So the difference between visible export and invisible export is called balance of trade in service. The difference between visible and invisible goods and visible export and import, balance of trade. The difference between invisible import and invisible export is balance of trade in service. Do we get the difference here? Yes. Here we're talking about balance of trade in service, which is the difference between invisible export and invisible import. This is balance of trade, which is the difference between visible export and visible import. Is it clear? Yes. Any question about this? No. So we stop here, and the next class we're going to take current accounts.